Welcome back to Taking Care of Business. This is the Dubai Real Estate Podcast. I've got Farida El Agamy, and I did say hopefully I've...
Perfect pronunciation.
Tell me a little bit about your organisation first, if you don't mind, also what you do.
So the Tharawat Family Business Forum is a non-profit platform organisation.
The most simple term you can, difference between family office and family enterprise.
Well, look, I can tell you, if there's no definition for family business, there is absolutely no definition for a family office. Right. I have never spoken to a family business owner who did not care about what was going to happen after. To me, succession is not a succession plan. It has to be a succession culture. It's often said that succession is the most critical moment in a family enterprise's lifespan.
My view is, and me and my brother talk about it, money reveals someone's true character. Welcome back to Taking Care of Business. This is the Dubai Real Estate Podcast, investing in all things Dubai and the GCC region. I have a very special guest, and actually we've been talking for about 30 minutes off camera, so I'm a little bit concerned about what we're going to talk about.
We're going to run out of topics.
We're going to run out of topics, aren't we? I've got Farida El Agamy, and I did say hopefully I've...
Perfect pronunciation.
Brilliant. And Farida is the GM of Tharawat Family Business Forum. So firstly, welcome, Farida.
Thank you very much, Carl. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. Well, thank you very much for your time, and parking was okay, so we're here to crack on with the podcast. So we have been talking about numerous different things over the last couple of weeks in our podcasts. About 4 weeks ago, we talked about foundations and how they may impact legacy. And what we're here to talk about today is basically family businesses, family enterprises, family offices. And you hear the words thrown about very, very often.
Yes.
And I think not many understand what they are, what they do, what its purpose is, and what impact they have on the region. And we talked, and even I was surprised. So tell me a little bit about your organisation first, if you don't mind. Also, what you do.
Of course. So the Tharawat Family Business Forum is a non-profit platform organization that gathers family business owners from across the MENA. And we educate, we offer learning opportunities for owners, but we also do a lot of research. And the reason why we do a lot of research is because across the MENA region, and that includes obviously the Gulf, the GCC countries, there's very little insight and know-how around family ownership and family businesses, and specifically also their impact, their macroeconomic impact.
Okay. So we talked about what it actually means in terms of what is a family office, what is an enterprise. Tell me a little bit about really what is one, what is a family business, what is an enterprise, what do they do here, what's the purpose, how can we define it? I know there's no probably actual definition, but what is it?
Well, unfortunately, there's about, I would say, around 20 different types of definitions of family business, and then there's different definitions of family offices, and then you have the family enterprise. So it's a bit of a wordy sector. Yeah. I'm not going to lie. The way we look at it is that it's an enterprise where the majority of control is in the hands of a family. In our case, we mostly work with family businesses that already are in second or third generation, so that have had that first succession moment already, because that's kind of quite a special situation, right? When you manage to cross that bridge and hand over to a next generation, that turns you into quite a special enterprise.
So a family enterprise, without naming names, can we say some companies that are responsible for large automotive businesses? Or
so that's a very interesting question, right? Because you find family businesses across the entire spectrum in terms of size and in terms of industry. What we are missing in the region is a really good segmentation, but we can generally say that about 70% of the private sector is family owned. So that already gives you kind of
that's here.
That is in the region,
okay,
absolutely.
The region, yeah.
So it depends, of course, on each country a little bit.
Yeah.
There are some countries where it's more, some countries where it's less, depending on the economic history of those countries as well, which is another story. It's very interesting. But then you, of course, start looking at what industries are they focused on, right? We see a lot of families in the Gulf, specifically in trading, because that's a very traditional activity and that has lasted across generations. In real estate, we actually see a lot of families, again, because it's something that has lasted across generations. But then, of course, we also see different families in terms of size, right? So you have a big concentration, actually, of micro and small businesses that are family-owned. And then it's thinning out a little bit more towards the medium-sized companies. And then, of course, you still have large conglomerates that are family-owned. But I would say in comparison, they're probably at the lower end of the spectrum in terms of numbers.
My mind's still blown by that 70%.
Yeah.
Unbelievable how important families or family businesses have to this economy or many economies in the region. It's unbelievable.
Well, it's really interesting because when I tell people that I grew up in Switzerland, they're like, well, Switzerland is a mature economy and it's going to have family businesses, but also a lot of non-family businesses. And then I tell them that, and these statistics are quite accurate, actually, 88% of our private sector is family-owned. 88% of the Swiss private sector is family-owned. So, that gives you the dimensions and the importance for us as an organization, but also as a community and a society to understand the role and how can we support that very important, asset, basically economic asset, to continue.
Would we know some of the names of some of these family enterprises? Like, would we see them on our roads every day in terms of like us relating them back to how it is in real life?
Well, of course. I mean, I'll give you an international one.
Okay.
Mars.
Really?
Mars is a fully family-owned private enterprise.
Wow.
It's one of the big 5-6 FMCG companies worldwide, and it's fully family-owned.
I've got a secret for you. I really like chocolate.
Well, there you go.
I want to see what Mars owned in terms of the brands. I was like, wow, that's unbelievable. So that's my little
exactly.
little vibe.
Or side project.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's very interesting. Okay, so what about family offices? Again, we talked off camera. There's an explosion of family offices in the region. What's the difference there?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So the family office, actually, scientifically speaking, is actually more of an Anglo-Saxon phenomenon. So we could trace back family offices to kind of the big American industrialist families, I would say turn of the century into the 20th century, that had really ridden the wave of the first, second industrial revolution, made a lot of money, and either cashed out or started realizing that they need to manage all these profits that they had made. And so the family office really was developed out of a need of these families in the US and some in the UK to kind of manage the cash that came out of the first and second industrial revolution. So that's where it comes from. And I think it's always important to remind ourselves when we just adopt terms like that, that we kind of remember, hang on a second, what's the concept behind this? Why did this develop? Why did it evolve? What was the context of its evolution? And then look at what's happening here. So fast forward 150 years or something, or 100 years, let's say, here we are in a region that looks very different from the US in those times. And yet suddenly we have this emergence of family offices. So what does that mean? And what we're looking at is really trying to understand how, in our case and in our region, it's a different format. Because what happens here is that people actually keep their operating entities, right? The family business, the traditional entity, will keep operating. We take care of it. We try to grow it. But at the same time, we are institutionalizing the wealth that has come from that enterprise. And so it's a parallel structure rather than a kind of one after the other system. And so what's interesting here is that we see that the need to institutionalize that capital comes from, in my opinion, part of it is certainly that we have an increased complexity of the markets, right? Before, you were okay with a bit of real estate, bit of gold, bit of public markets, and then maybe if you want to do some alternatives, you can play around with it. Today, it's very, very complex to take the right decisions. And again, if we go back to the idea of what's behind a family ownership, that is often generational success. So that means I'm not just investing for today or tomorrow or even next year. I'm actually investing for my grandchildren. So what does that mean? And because of the increased complexity, it's interesting to see that we now start structuring that capital much more than we did before.
Family offices, in the most simplistic way, is a person or a number of people managing a family's wealth based on obviously whether it's short-term, long-term needs. In essence, that's what it is. Obviously, there'll be certain governance with regards to things they have to do, things they have to meet, but essentially that's what it is.
Well, look, I can tell you, if there's no definition for family business, there is absolutely no definition for a family office.
Okay.
I'm not helping. I know, I'm not helping. I know. Pandora's box. A family office, people in this space always say, you know a family office, then you know a family office. Like, there is no comparison. There are trends, there are comparative contexts that lead to similar decision-making or structuring, but there's very little right now, actually, in terms of blueprint of what a family office looks like.
Okay, before we move on then on this, because we could talk about it for a long time, in very the most simple term you can, difference between family office and family enterprise.
Yeah, so a family business, what we call a family business, and I'm going to just tell your viewers and listeners that this is the definition that we work with. The family business is the operating traditional asset that is a factory or the enterprise that generates the revenue for the family, right? We would also call the legacy asset, okay, right? So that has been the one thing that has been handed over across generations. The family office is an investment platform.
Yeah.
It's also a governance. It can be a governance platform. So it can be used, for example, that's why I'm saying the definition is really hard, because on the one hand, you have family offices, we're obviously talking about single family offices that purely manage the wealth of families. Then you have single family offices that actually manage the wealth, but then also manage the family governance, for example. They do training for the next generation. They help the family with private wealth management. They organize even philanthropy of the family. So all of that could go under potentially a family office.
I'm stealing my next points, by the way. I've got all my points, you're stealing them.
Well, you know,
You've done your research.
We can finish earlier.
So, one of the questions I've got here was talking about family enterprises, and when we talked off camera, it opened my mind up hugely with regards to succession. Mm-hmm. So, I think we talked about myself and Lewis, with the owners of this business. Technically, we are a family business.
Absolutely.
I have 2 kids. He has 2 kids.
Yep.
Let's say there's an explosion of more kids, another 5 each, for example. Yeah. You talked off camera about potentially being, 12 decision makers or more in a business enterprise in the future. Do you elaborate a bit more on that?
Sure. Well, we started talking about it, and I said that to me, succession is not a succession plan. It has to be a succession culture. And it's always said that, I sometimes disagree with it, but anyways, that's for another time. It's often said that succession is the most critical moment in a family enterprise's lifespan. And I understand why, because obviously you're going from a concentrated decision making. Let's say if we go from first generation to second generation, but even second generation to third generation, right? So siblings to cousins. You're talking about a transfer of everything that is relevant to the success of this enterprise. Decision making, values, vision, long-term thinking, all of that came from a concentrated group of people or from one individual, and suddenly now it's more than one person. So it's not just, actually funny to think about it, it's not just for the family, it's also that the entity, the business, needs to get used to the fact that, hang on a second, now there's a whole different set of conversations happening. So how does that then link to the business, and how do we avoid that rocks the ship too much, right? A bit of disruption is always healthy, I think.
Yeah.
But it has to be healthy disruption, yeah, right? And it has to be kind of with an intention of future success. So succession to me is a culture and not a process or not a plan. Why is it a culture? It's because I think that we all as we are aware of our mortality, and people hate it when I talk like this because it is about mortality.
And by the way, I was talking to my father about something a couple of weeks ago. People feel really uncomfortable talking about
absolutely
that,
and it is hard. It is very, very hard. And we have a tendency to tell people, "Oh, you just have to let go," and I find that so disrespectful, because none of us is comfortable talking about this. None of us is psychologically equipped to be comfortable unless we've done years and years of work to come to terms with our mortality. So you already have that issue, right? So it's about what is after me. Succession planning is actually about thinking without yourself. That makes it complex.
Because I have heard via different conversations people's view of, well, I'm gone. It's not my problem. But the way I think about it is actually there's 500 people wherever in this that need. Basically, what happens next? Am I getting paid? Is there still a job? Is there still a business?
And it really depends on your relationship with those people, right? If I pretend or I'm convinced that I love someone or that I care for people, then I need to take the responsible step and think beyond myself. And that's hard. The other hard thing is then for the people who are supposedly need to take over, I can't just wait to equip them. Right? Very often we see people waiting until people are like 20, 25 years old because they think, oh, then they intellectually can understand. Yes, maybe the intellectual capacity increases, but emotionally, there's a lot that happens before that. So there has to be communication and dialogue to explain how that process is running.
Off subject here, but have you come across, because you advise a lot of family businesses at large levels and down, have you come across a founder and owner, obviously without naming names, where they have that carelessness viewpoint of, well, again, it's not my problem?
Honestly, in my 14 years, almost never. I literally, I can't say never because maybe I don't remember, but I would say that from what I remember, I have never spoken to a family business owner who did not care about what was going to happen after.
Okay. So how do you navigate, or how do you advise from a large-ish family for the succession, or navigating how that might happen? Because my view is, and me and my brother talk about it, money reveals someone's true character. And unfortunately, it makes you mad sometimes when you've got it and when you haven't got it, and you can kind of see people behave differently. So how do you kind of navigate them potentially ropey waters where you've got lots of different personalities having a say on something?
Yes. Well, honestly, the first thing I always say is start early. And people are shocked when I say start when they're 5. Start even earlier. Yeah, of course. I'm not saying bring them to the boardroom, sit through a board meeting. But what I mean is, as a leader, you know what's difficult in family businesses is we both have to be leaders of the business and leaders in our community and our family. Those are very different leadership types. They're very different leadership styles.
Yeah.
And I think that when we talk about succession, I cannot apply my business leadership style to making these people run the way I want to run them. And I think that's now emerging in research, is that it's a much more collaborative process than it is a one-way street. And you were asking before about, legal structures and all of that. I'm a lawyer. I love well-structured situations, right? I think they're worth so much, and they help when things are not clear, when it's murky. But do they fix a situation where people are not able to communicate? I don't think so.
So have you had instances where you've had the clarity of the legal documentation, but not agreement or cooperation from people in the family?
More than you would think.
Really?
More than you would think.
So how would you tackle that in your role or your advisory with regards to day-to-day?
So what we do, we are educators, right? We believe that it's important for people to have access to information. It's important for people to hear other family stories. We were talking about the importance of peer learning. So we really believe in that. It's much more impactful for someone to listen to a peer that has gone through the same journey and that has come out of it with a better structure, a better system, better communication in the family, than trying to kind of just focus on our own little lives and think that we have enough exposure. So I think speaking to others and being exposed to others, that's part of what we do. The second thing is that in the Middle East, specifically for Middle Eastern families, the complexity is manifold because we have geopolitical things that are happening. We have social evolution, demographic changes. There's a lot of change happening. And I think that as an organization, I see our role as having that holistic view of society and then asking the questions that we think families are asking themselves, but perhaps don't have the time to explore, etc. And that ideally should contribute to the creation of that dialogue culture in the family, but also succession culture ultimately, because you're bringing people together around topics that gathers them.
I'm conscious that we've been speaking quite a lot about succession and our potential demise. In terms of the outfit and how you sit within a family enterprise, like what other upsides could there be in terms of not just education from a legacy perspective, but what about efficiencies? What about governance in terms of improving people's knowledge of how to get the best out of all situations? How's that handled?
So we have something that we call the Tharawat model, and the Tharawat model is something that keeps evolving, but it's a model that looks at external disruptors and internal drivers, and that's how we position the family enterprise. So you can imagine the enterprise at the heart of this model. Inside the enterprise, you have these drivers that you have more or less control over. And then outside of the family enterprise, you have the factors that you do not have control over. So these are the demographics, environment, geopolitical shifts, mega trends, like, for example, that happened that we couldn't influence. So when we look at a family enterprise and we want it to succeed, so what does success mean also? That's a question, right? Do we want it to eternally grow? Do we want it to transform? Do we want it perhaps to split into two family enterprises? All of those scenarios for me are valid because I think ultimately what we're trying to do is to preserve a really important economic asset for this region.
Yep.
And so when you look at these internal drivers, of course you have to look at, on the one hand, succession, but then that's just one stream, right? The other stream is, how do I behave as a leader? What's the leadership that is required to lead in all its different facets, this enterprise, right? Then you look at, how do I need to look at my enterprise in its sector? All these industries are shifting. Maybe I've been in steel for 80 years, right? And I breathe steel, i.e. know steel by heart, but the steel industry is disrupted. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean for me? How do I shift my decision-making that I, with my 80 years of legacy, become an agile organization? So all of those are questions we need to ask.
Well, I was going to ask, how relevant are family enterprises in the 21st century or for moving forward? Because I know family businesses very often are ran by the family. Typically, they're people day to day doing stuff, and dependent on the size of the business. But can they get left behind? Is it because of the way they're set up and formed that they're perhaps slow to change? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm slightly biased, of course, because I think family enterprises are very important, and I think given the right context and the right input, they will always outlast any other model. That's my personal, slightly biased opinion. Do they have challenges? Absolutely, they have challenges. It's the comfort zone challenge, for example, right? You're leading in your sector, could even be a smaller company, right? But you own that segment in the industry. Is there a need to disrupt? Is there a need to change? Not so sure. How fast can we take that decision? Not so sure. I think it's a rhino, that animal that kind of starts running slow, but then picks up and outruns pretty much anyone. I think family businesses are like that. Once they have the right incentives and they have the right tools, decision-making can be super fast, can be very agile, and can actually outrun other economic actors.
But perhaps using an analogy of looking at other rhinos, or other animals, seeing how fast they go, seeing how right or wrong they do things, maybe better it.
And I think absolutely. And I think what's also important to think about is, do we need family businesses in the economy, right? I literally once had someone saying, well, we have multinationals, we have startups, we have private equity companies that, kind of make sure that private companies grow. So do we need family enterprises? And my answer is absolutely.
Well, your statistic backs it up, 70%. How many jobs, I would love to know, has that created?
there is a statistic that I usually don't quote because I don't really know where it comes from and I haven't verified the sources.
Okay.
But it's said that about 60% of job creation in the region is family. So, I mean, for me, there's no question. The question is, what are family businesses going to look like? And I think that's a very interesting and exciting question, because we have the evolution of the family office. We have the family businesses that are these legacy companies and that can transform. So how are they going to look like in the next 20, 30, 40 years with all the shifts and changes that we see in the global market?
So how can they future-proof? Is there any work you're doing in now? Because we did talk off camera, and I'm fascinated with the educating siblings, family. Is that a part of future-proofing?
Of course. I think having a harmonized group of successors, whether it's going that they are just going to be just shareholders, whether they want to enter the business, they will need to have to take decisions together. So future-proofing for me is making sure that whoever is going to have decision-making power knows how to take decisions in a group. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I think, again, to come back to our role, is to look at that kind of future scenario and try to understand with different stakeholders and experts, what is the future of our economic reality going to look like, and how does that translate to the realities that family businesses will have to face? Because I believe in the importance of long-term capital. I really believe in that. I think every region will need a mix of short-term, quick-moving capital and capital that actually secures the long-term future.
A big part of what you do is educating, right? And obviously there are other parts around that. So do you have younger siblings, or whatever it might be, let's say call it someone who's in their teens, in terms of, do you do education or work with them? Because they are our next leaders, right?
Of course. I mean, just recently we were asked to do a workshop for I think 18 next generations of a family here, and the ages were between 13 and 21.
Really?
You know, and of course, I'm not going to go in guns blazing with, you know, this is the board of directors and this is, you know, your shareholders agreement, all of those things. It's about awareness raising. Yeah. It's about slowly, softly getting people used to the idea, what it means to have the responsibility of an enterprise. Because the benefits, if the business goes well, the benefits are clear. If the business doesn't go well, also we notice that we're in a family business, right? But if the business goes well, we have a nice life, but we need to start get people ready to be able to understand what comes with that.
Can I just say, so I'm not a big believer, you're going to shoot me down now because you're a lawyer. I'm not a big believer in higher education, let's call it university, unless there is a specific requirement for something you want to do. So I have different family members who've gone to university and not ended up doing any field of anything that they do now, which is fine. They've enjoyed their time. My time in school, I can't from memory remember any real true value. I'm sure there was over the time, any true value I've took away that's benefited me in work life. My point being is that what you're doing there, the value and the understanding of getting people prepared will be, I think, far more valuable than that secondary school period, because a lot of what you're doing with that can truly benefit them in life. Whereas I did my daughter's homework, they were talking about Pythagoras, and I'm thinking, oh my God, like, is she going to use this ever?
Well, don't ask me that now, because
it's truly amazing, honestly. Yeah. It's great to see, because if that happened more around the world, I'm not sure it does, I think we'd be less underprepared as our next gen of people come into the boardrooms. And
well, I think it's about empathy, and it's really about holistic leadership, because when you know what the parameters are that you work with, and the parameters include the talent in your family, the talent outside of your family, and when you have basically X-ray vision of what that means, and you do it with empathy and understanding, I think then, honestly, it doesn't really matter how people evolve and what they do from a diploma perspective. But I think it's about generating an understanding and a culture around the opportunities that you have as a collective, the rights you have as an individual. That's a whole other topic, right? How do I balance those two things?
Yeah.
And to give people the right to be who they are with the skill set they were born with and what they would like to explore. And I think that the beauty of the family enterprise to me is that incredible kind of connection between very strong entrepreneurial financial decision making, right, which is not scientific, but it has a certain hardness to it.
Yeah.
And then that very empathetic, almost instinctive leadership of a group of very diverse people, but who all can, in my opinion, contribute to the success.
ESG.
Yeah.
We're pivoting here. What is that? What
is it?
It's another mind, but what is it? What does it mean? And what impact will it have on family enterprises? Because I'm not going to answer it for you, but I'm sure you answer the question, in fact.
No, I mean, thank you for the pivot.
Yeah.
So obviously ESG, I'm not going to explain what ESG is because I think every listener has heard of it, knows kind of what it is.
Just human, what is it in basic terms? What is ESG? What does it stand for?
So it's environmental, social and government principles that are applied in an enterprise. And it's concepts that have risen over the last, I would say decade actually, that we start realizing that we need to look at an enterprise as more just as a commercial entity. An enterprise has a footprint, and that footprint needs to be looked at in terms of the responsibility that the enterprise has towards its stakeholders.
Okay.
The stakeholders can be manifold. We can start with the employees, we can start with suppliers, but then you start looking at society as a whole, right? And so the idea that now a company is being measured not just by its financial success, but also by standards that ask it to report on how do I impact society? How do I impact the planet? How do I impact kind of the ecosystem that makes me thrive, that makes me grow, and what do I give back to it? So that's kind of the concept. And governance is in there because we've spoken about governance. Governance to me is really kind of the nervous system of an enterprise. A well-running governance system facilitates every single aspect. So, yeah.
Let's say hypothetically, I wanted to raise money for the business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. An ESG, from my understanding, is quite high in agendas with regards to being a part of your, not just your offering, but your thought process and how you see that. Is there pressure at government level for family enterprises to be more responsible, not just environmentally, but socially?
I mean, I think across the world, we see changes in regulation, right? We see changes that governments, driven by a kind of mutual understanding that, companies cannot just benefit from a certain ecosystem, but they have to give back. So I think that's a generally accepted idea now at this point in time. So what does that mean? Different governments are going to take different actions. Certain governments are going to be very heavy on regulation. Other governments are going to be more kind of suggestive in terms of this is where you should look, etc. For example, listed companies, very easy, right? Because you have listing rules and you have governance rules for listed companies. You can literally put in there in the UK, for example, is actually quite strong on that. They have very clear ESG principles that companies that are listed have to report on. Now, here it's starting. Listed companies already have a reporting mandate on ESG. For private companies, it's a bit slower, but where it comes into play is because highly reputable lenders, for example, are often regulated by their home countries. Those home countries tend to regulate financial industry quite strictly. So then that kind of cascades down to the customer. Mm-hmm. So even if it's not at the core of your reflection as a business that you're like, it's probably not on my priorities list, to look at these factors. Specifically, your suggestion of if I want to raise money, I actually need to be prepared that certain lenders, for example, nowadays, or investors, if you're raising equity, are going to ask me these questions. So I need to be prepared for that.
So I look at one of the biggest companies in the world, let's say Apple, for example. A lot of what they do now is supply chains, is carbon neutral or carbon free. Is that what some of the things that we're talking about, where they're making an effort to whatever they're doing, they're not harming?
Absolutely. Well, you'll see that these mega companies, when they make a shift, often what happens, regulations are following because they're setting new standards, right? And so I always observe what these big companies are doing because it's very likely that at some point there is going to be a regulation that's going to be issued, because what they're showing is that it is possible.
Yeah.
And that you remain profitable whilst doing all of this.
Yeah.
And so, it's kind of, we're putting a man on the moon. We can do this, right? So how do we now, what does that mean for private companies? I mean, obviously that's a whole complex question.
I could talk to you for many, many, many more hours. I'm conscious of time. I'm having someone wave the time at me at the moment. We've gone a little bit over. So before we wrap up, I am quite blown away with the reach this podcast gets. I get people on planes and streets saying, hi, Carl, asking questions. If someone has a family business, SME, enterprise, that are not in contact with you already, where do they go and speak to you guys? How they reach out, and what's the step?
Well, our main website is tharawat.org. So people are most welcome to come and look us up and download some of our reports. Contact us if you have a concrete question, of course. We'd love to have people read our publications. Our latest publication is actually ESG related, climate change and family business. We created a checklist for family businesses to look at their impact and footprint. And yes, I mean, you find us on social media across all channels. And
you have different options with regards to membership, which will invite you to come and see you guys and stuff like that. Is that
Absolutely.
Right?
So anyone who contacts us, we will then have a look. We will have a discussion. It's a very personal process. So we'll look at what the family business needs and what we can do to support.
Farida, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Everybody, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.